to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on the agenda is open forum. If you have an item for open forum, I'd ask you to keep it brief because we cannot respond. We consider for a future agenda, and if you do come to the podium, please give your name and street address. I'll start with board members. Is there anyone that have open forum
I do not.
items? Okay. Any members of the public? Hearing none, I will continue with new business. We have a discussion, continued discussion regarding 370 Summer Street, the Di Lorenzo Conservation Restriction, number 47. This will be presented by Nancy Ruffo, our Conservation Administrator. Would you go right ahead? Thank you.
Hi, Nancy Ruffo, Conservation Administrator. As the Chair mentioned, this is a continued discussion. We are requesting a signature from the Select Board, or signatures from the Select Board for the Di Lorenzo Farm Conservation Restriction. The previous times that it came before you, there were some questions from board members and also the tenant farmer, which we have resolved. So I'm hoping that there are no further questions and we can move this forward.
Thank you. Any members of the public have any questions? Do any board members, I know that we spoke about this and it has been discussed. If not, I'm happy to take a vote.
Can I,
Go right ahead.
sorry, unfortunately, I was unable to attend that meeting.
Yeah.
So can you maybe just summarize for me and maybe the public who did not participate in the previous meeting, just exactly what the issue was and how was it resolved?
Sure.
Thank you.
So the conservation restriction is a document that's required because the property was purchased with Community Preservation Act funds. It's a document that is in perpetuity. The farmer, who has a 10-year license agreement, in reading the CR document, which is very confusing and convoluted if you're not used to reading it, because it starts out with a list of everything that's prohibited. So if you're on the property trying to be a farmer and you read it, it's like, hold on a second, I'm doing all of these things that it says I can't do. And then the next section, it basically says, oh, but you can do these things as long as you have an agreement with the landowner, which is us. So that's the vehicle that we use for that is that license agreement.
Okay.
But it's caused anxiety with the farmer. And we had a meeting last week that Brian and Amy both came to, Jeff Chandler from the Ag Committee, Sam Butcher, who's on the board at O'Neill Farm, Pat Loring, who's the conservation restriction extraordinaire.
Expert.
And expert. Who am I missing? Is that it?
That was it.
And Brad and Amanda Sovic, who are the tenant farmers.
So it was basically, by the sounds of it, kind of miscommunication, or in terms of, not miscommunication, but a kind of, there was a clarification on actually what you're allowed to do and what not allowed to do, and the town is happy and the farmer is happy at the end of all this.
Right, and the document never changed.
Never changed.
So the one that you have seen the past couple of times is
Right.
the same. It's really a level of comfort
Okay.
that they can do what they're hoping to
Okay.
do.
Oh, all right. Excellent. Thank you very much for that clarification.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm the one who's holding this up for a couple of weeks, and I
That's fine.
appreciate everybody's patience, Nancy, you especially.
No problem.
And Pat. As Nancy just said, it was an issue of interpretation
Right.
of a document. And just to clarify, we're all on the same page in terms of what we want to happen out there.
Yes.
And my personal concern was making sure that we weren't setting up a document that inadvertently potentially prohibited some of the things that we all want to do. And that was clarified. So it wasn't an issue that was raised specifically by the farmer. It was a conversation I had with the farmers who I know to confirm that they were comfortable moving forward, or basically to find out if there were any issues under the new document, because there is a license already, and this was another document that said, you know, with as Nancy said, a whole host of additional provisions
Right.
that could make your head spin. So given this is not a huge money-making enterprise and a lot of it is blood, sweat, and tears, I thought it was worthwhile, even though I know it was a bit of a delay, for us to make sure that everybody was literally on the same page.
Okay.
And we are, and I appreciate everybody's time on seeing it through. Thank you.
Betsy Sullivan, Washington Street. Do the restrictions any way conflict with the right to farm, that law that we passed a few years ago?
I'll answer it, Mike. They do not. No, the restriction is a boilerplate document that comes from Boston.
No, I've seen it, but.
Oh, you have,
but-
okay, it does not.
But would they be allowed to sell their produce on the
Yes,
property?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, yes. And that's actually one of the goals, is to have a farm stand there.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay. Any other questions? With that, I will take a motion.
I move that the Select Board vote to grant and approve the 370 Summer Street De Lorenzo Conservation Restriction Number 47 to the Wildlands Trust, Inc., pursuant to General Law, Chapter 184, Sections 31 through 33, as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. All right. And now, for the only other new business item, the Sustainable Budget Task Force update to the Select Board and fiscal year 26 budget message recommendations. And this will be presented by Mary McKinnon, our Finance Director. Thank you.
My pleasure. Before I get started, is there anyone else in the room that has any other business before you? Because
No.
this is going to take a little bit of time.
Just the town manager. And he's here.
He's here for the duration.
Oh, actually, is anybody here from Holy Family Church? We'll handle that event permit after. Thank you very much for mentioning that.
Excellent. All righty. Good evening, and thank you for having me. I'm here tonight to provide you with an interim update by the Sustainable Budget Task Force. This is our third update since the task force was formed. In your packet this evening, you should have received both a copy of the slide deck that we will go through, as well as the interim update report that we had provided to you in your packet late last week. So tonight I'm going to go through this slide deck to provide context to the budget memo that we had included in your packet for you.
Mary, just one moment. We have a couple of other committees here. Do you want to open your meetings now, or do you want to wait until Mary concludes?
Oh,
I don't think I have a quorum.
Okay.
You don't.
Does school committee have a quorum?
Nope.
Nope. Fiscal advisory, I only see Alex.
Alex is on there for fiscal.
Okay.
That
All
answers
right.
that.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you. On April 22nd of this year, the town manager established the Sustainable Budget Task Force. This 7-member group includes a wide array of expertise in town finances, town operations, and the town's rich history. The charge of the group was to develop options to prepare a 5-year sustainable forecast. We are not presenting a forecast here tonight because we have not reached that part of our work yet. However, we are here this evening to present recommendations to you to set budget policy for our department heads and for our community. So why do we need a task force? Let me remind everybody that in August of last year, when we were preparing the FY25 budget, we held a meeting to discuss the FY25 budget cycle. At that time, it was clear that the town could squeeze out one more balanced budget, but that we would face a crossroad with the FY26 budget. We are here, and we have reached that intersection where our sustainable revenues no longer support our operating costs. So since the formation of the Budget Task Force, the task force itself has met 16 times. And in order to, the task force has met 16 times beginning in April. In June, we provided our first update. In July, we provided our second update, and here tonight on August 26th, we are providing our third update. During the course of that work, we have analyzed both our revenues, to understand whether our existing revenues are sustainable and recurring to fund our operations, as well as to identify any opportunities or revenue maximization areas where we could enhance our revenues to support our operations. We've also taken a deep dive into our expenditures in working with our department heads and other folks throughout the course of our work. And tonight we are here to ask this select board to endorse a budget directive that we will get to at the end of the presentation. So how did we get here? What I'm going to review with you are some factors and some issues that were heavily analyzed by the task force and helped to shape our conversations. When we embarked upon this process, we actually thought that this was going to be a pretty straightforward financial exercise, and what we found out was that it wasn't. As a reminder, the funding sources to fund our operating budget include the tax levy, local receipts, state aid, and our voter-approved exempt debt. Of our entire operating budget, 74% of it is funded by our tax levy, so taxation, whether it's real estate or personal property. 10% of our budget is funded by local receipts, and I've provided some examples of our top 4 local receipts. Any new revenue initiatives that the task force has contemplated would increase or impact our local receipts category. So on the order of magnitude, when we're trying to develop revenue maximization initiatives and only 10% of our budget is funded by local receipts, the materiality of that impact is going to be less significant when compared to some of the other funding sources. State aid, on average, we see a 2% annual increase year over year. So what we know is that that's relatively consistent, but we're not seeing any wide variations in our ability to rely on state aid to fund our operating budget. So what I can tell you is that after looking at these funding sources, there is no magic bullet. We have been walking a tightrope for quite some time. So let's talk about why. Duxbury is a community steeped in history, tradition, and pride, with a very strong set of core values. These characteristics drive the behavior of our community. In other words, the town places a very strong emphasis on the quality of life, aesthetics, preservation, but those choices are heavily dependent upon our financial resources to support that way of life. To dig a little deeper, the community has a long upheld desire to remain a small, safe, rural, or as Betsy likes to call it, pastoral community with very limited commercial enterprise. The town favors preserving historic resources and open space over development and expansion. This community supports a high-performing school district and offers a variety of recreational amenities. For all of these reasons, people love living here, and they love the Duxbury way of life. But there are consequences to those choices, and that they come with a price. And we are at the crossroads where that price tag exceeds our available revenues. These are some excerpts from some annual town reports. And what they reflect is that I'm not standing here telling you anything new. In fact, this conversation has been happening since at least 2015, perhaps earlier, but that's as far as I went back. From the excerpts of the annual town report, we can see that they have been describing fiscal challenges, flat revenue streams, spending up to the levy limit, Band-Aid relief, and questioning whether the status quo will be sustainable. There's also been an awful lot of conversation in recent months regarding population, whether it's been from the Envision Duxbury report or the Age and Dementia Friendly report, or even from the task force. It is clear that Duxbury's population continues to grow. Between 1970 and 2022, we have more than doubled. And the projections indicate that that growth will continue. We will be providing services to more and more people. That includes the number of people voting in elections, registering dogs, paying bills, swimming at the Percy Walker Pool, driving on our roads, across all areas of our organization. We need to ensure that our department heads have adequate resources to manage that increased workload. The town and the nation have been experiencing significant inflationary pressures over the past several years. This inflationary pressure affects both wages as well as the prices that we pay to our vendors. And once those prices go up, they rarely come back down. Yes, we recognize that households and businesses are also feeling this inflationary pinch. The cost of heating their homes and their businesses has increased, just like the cost of heating all of our town buildings. Some folks have argued that perhaps inflation has contributed to about 50% of our funding problems. I would argue that it's a significant factor, but that coupled with our lifestyle choices that we talked about a moment ago are what are having the biggest impact on our budget and our ability to fund it. Let's talk about some of the other factors that have shaped our conversations or heavily weighed in the work of the task force. What we're looking at here is a trend with respect to our public education system. What this chart shows is that the town's minimum share of school costs increases every year, even if our enrollment declines slightly. In other words, just sitting still, our required local contribution grows year over year. That required local contribution is set by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and it is the minimum cost that a town is required to fund in order to support the public education of their students. So we can see that we've had, since 2019, an enrollment decline of about just over 9%, but our minimum contribution during that same period has increased 8.8%. And that is through no work of our own, just sitting still. It's a mandate. Okay. So when we talk about our ability to pay or affordability, one of the factors that we look at is median income. When a community is, let me take a step back, I apologize. So with respect to the state and that minimum required contribution, that minimum required contribution is set by the state for each and every community. It's the portion of their foundation budget that they need to support. The way that the state calculates the portion that you are required to support is that they use a phrase called the minimum ability to pay. That ability to pay is based on three characteristics. One is income wealth, two is property wealth, and three is the municipal revenue growth factor. So with respect to property wealth, we've had a number of conversations here in this room when we set the tax rate year over year, and you have heard about how the property values in town have increased significantly over several years. So you know that our property wealth is going up. Our income wealth is reported by businesses who send their W-2 data to the state, to the Department of Revenue. So the Department of Revenue collects all wage and income statistics from all employers across the Commonwealth, and they use that information to determine income wealth in a community. And what we can see here is that the income wealth for, this is the last reportable year available, in fiscal 22, the town's median income increased 14% up to $148,505. That is a 40%, that rate is 40% higher here in Duxbury than in all of Plymouth County. And so when the state looks at the community's ability to pay, and they look at characteristics like property wealth and income wealth increasing, the likelihood that our state aid will increase is negligible.
Mary, I'm not sure I understand how they got that number. You said it's based on employers in reporting of employers in the town report these
Not
numbers?
just the town, across the Commonwealth. So W-2 data is sent to the Department of Revenue. in order to calculate income taxes, to report all the income taxes that people have paid on their wages and their earnings. So the Department of Revenue collects all of that data that is submitted to them through all of the employers in the Commonwealth.
Thank you.
Mike, looks like you were about to jump in.
No, I just was wondering about you see it on the checks, like, I was just going to say exactly what you said. You see it sometimes, it just loads up automatically, and I'm guessing that's where they get it from, but
They
It's
get
not employers in Duxbury.
it's like, it could
the-
be any bank,
That's what I was
any
It's the
bank,
state, it's the
corporation,
Commonwealth.
yeah.
And because there are people who actually work out of state who pay Massachusetts taxes. So it's any employee who is employed in the state of Massachusetts who is subject to Massachusetts income tax, their employer is required to submit that data to the Department of Revenue.
So if I get a pension from my employers based out of Houston, that still is recorded and added to that, to the calculation?
That is, because you reside here, and if you are subject to taxation in the state of Massachusetts,
Yep.
wherever you reside, your employer is required to submit that data.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right. State assessments. So these are funds that the town is required to pay for programs that are run by the state. These monies are automatically withheld from our state aid distributions. So regardless of whether we want to support these programs or not, we are required to pay for those. And they are reduced right from our state aid distributions. Some of those examples include the impact of charter schools, the impact of school choice, funding the Plymouth County operations, their budget, Old Colony Planning Council, mosquito control, regional transit, and more. So what we can see is on a 5-year average, those costs are increasing 2.94%. When you look at a number like that and you try to marry it up against the Prop 2.5 limitations that we are subject to, you can see that these costs are growing higher than our ability to generate revenues under Prop 2.5. And it's interesting to note that these are state programs that are growing at a rate that's faster than Prop 2.5, when the limitation is from the state to set Prop 2.5.
Just quick, is there one or that's significantly increasing that? Because some of these are small amounts of money.
So the biggest impact, the largest cost program that we have under state assessments is charter schools,
Yeah.
the impact of charter schools. Okay? All right. Fixed costs. So when it comes to preparing a budget, the first step that happens when you prepare a budget is you have to identify your revenues. And then the next step is that you have to meet your mandatory obligations. Our mandatory obligations are twofold. Number one, it's debt service, and number two, it's our fixed costs, our contractual obligations with our employees for the benefits that we have committed to providing. So what we can see when we look at our fixed costs, the cost of health insurance, life insurance, pension obligations, as well as the insurance that we utilize to cover all of our town assets, we can see that on a 5-year average, those costs are also increasing at a rate that's higher than our ability to increase our tax levy. They're increasing at an average 5-year average rate of 3.55%.
Mary, are these the numbers for just the town, for the entire town, including the school?
That is.
Thank you.
That is. When we budget our fixed costs, they are budgeted centrally, and so that is both town and school. Did I break the microphone?
No. I think there's inflation in the microphone.
Can I keep going? Yeah, okay. So one thing I want to point out here, however, is right in the middle of the chart, there is a line item called contributory pensions. And if you look at the FY25 column, it's the $5.9 million number. I do want to let you know that there is some relief in the longer term horizon. Now remember that the Sustainable Budget Task Force, our purview is to look at a 5-year window. With respect to our pension contributions, there will be some relief in that area, in that appropriation that is required by Plymouth County will be declining once we attain our fully funded pension obligation date. That date was set by Plymouth County several years ago, and it was anticipated that we would reach that fully funded obligation date in 2029. However, earlier this year, Plymouth County Retirement Association had reevaluated their position and their portfolio performance in order to determine whether they were going to be fully funded by 2029. And what they realized was that they were not going to make that funding date, that funding schedule. So they have actually extended that out by an additional 2 years. So where we initially thought we may have seen some relief in that appropriation for pensions in 2029, that actually will not happen until 2031, unfortunately. Okay. All right, with respect to debt service, so this was one of the mandatory obligations that I just mentioned a moment ago when we put our budget together. And what I want to do is draw your attention to an excerpt from the town's financial management policies. And one of the things that our financial management policy says, and it's a good thing, is that we should constantly reinvest in our organization. We want to make sure that we are maintaining our assets and providing the tools and equipment that we need to do our job. So what this is saying is that the town should, on an annual basis, carve out between 2 and 5% of the value of the tax levy. So if we take the tax levy and we carve out between 2 to 5%, that is what we should be allocating for our capital program. And that can be funded by a variety of sources in combination with one another. So borrowing, free cash, or budgetary appropriations. But at a minimum, we want to make sure that we're doing that constant reinvestment. So if you can take a look at the next slide. So here we have our debt service budgets, and I've broken it into a couple of components. The first couple of lines are talking about the debt service within the levy. The next section right below it is exempt debt service, and then below it is the subtotal, is the total of those two categories. So there's a big difference between debt service in the levy and debt service that is exempt. So the financial policy is clear, and it says that the town should continue to invest 2 to 5% annually, net of or exclusive of exempt debt. So exempt debt aside, we should have capacity in our levy to fund 2 to 5% for capital reinvestment. So if we, and you can see, and that's the top section, what you can see is that there is a declining capacity in our levy to fund debt service. That is problematic, because once you start to lose the capacity in your budget to fund things like debt service, it becomes very difficult to recapture that back into your levy. Did somebody just walk by me? Oh, okay.
Trying to fix the noise.
It becomes very, very difficult to recapture that in the levy, because essentially what's happened is that that tax levy capacity has been used for other purposes. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that we always have at least a consistent level of debt service in our general fund, or a ever so slightly growing level of debt service in our budget, in order to make sure that we're focused on that reinvestment. So how far off are we? Well, if you look at the bottom of the chart, which is in peach, the assumption is if we should target between 2 to 5% of reinvestment. If we were to spend 2% financing it with debt service and 3% financing our capital investments with cash, how far off are we from that 2% allocation of using debt service? That is the bottom row down below, and you can see that we have clearly not met that target as of today. And if we went back and looked at a couple years prior, the situation would also be the same. So what we have done is we have lost very valuable capacity in our tax levy to fund capital investments. And that's something that we need to be concerned about.
Can you just
Yep.
is this interfering in the
The meeting
broadcast?
coverage, no. The meeting itself is normal, as usual. Yep, so the meeting itself is fine.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Next. All right. So the reason I went through all of those slides is because the task force is attempting to find some solutions to our limited revenues, and to our growing expenses. And it all boils down to our 97-3 split. And that's what I'm going to term this from now on. We are 97% a residential tax base, 3% commercial and industrial. And that is derived solely based on our choices from the chart that we talked about earlier, with the longstanding traditions and the things that people love about Duxbury. But with that being said, this is a chart that I have shown you before, which is the other communities across the Commonwealth who share a very similar or higher characteristic of the tax levy split between residential and commercial. So in other words, we know that Duxbury is 97% residential, 3% commercial. How many other communities share that same characteristic? What we found is that we went from 11 communities to 12 communities. So last year when we looked at this chart, there were 11. This year there's 12. There are 12 other communities that have a similar or higher percent of a residential tax base. But what we did with the chart this year through the work of the task force is that we expanded it to take a look at school districts. And what you can tell from this chart is that Duxbury is a unicorn in this analysis. We have a higher population, significantly by far, than every other community. And we are the only community out of this entire list that funds independently a local school district. Every one of these other communities is part of a regional school district. That means that these regional school districts can have economies of scale by sharing costs, but when we make the choice of a high caliber school system that we fund independently here in Duxbury, there are costs or consequences associated with that. Well, that's okay. When education accounts for more than half of your budget overall, and you're independently supporting your own local school district, it's easy to see why there's a high degree of pressure in our budget at this time. So tonight we're going to talk about a couple of findings and recommendations. Our final report from the task force will include a more thorough description of our findings, but for tonight's purpose, we're presenting the results of our research and asking you to endorse a budget directive. With respect to revenues, we covered this in our last interim update when I was here. Our primary funding sources are sustainable, and they encompass about 90% of the revenues needed to support our budget. There is little likelihood that major initiatives will yield material benefit in the 5-year window that we are discussing to impact local receipts. And we need to continue to work on reviewing our fee structures to ensure that we are covering our costs. While we did identify some opportunities to increase revenues, those changes will only provide a modest incremental increase and not fully address the structural deficit. And with respect to expenditures, as I said in the beginning, when we started this process, we thought it was going to be a straightforward financial exercise. What we found out is that it is not. We started out looking for cost savings or even cost avoidance, but what we found were a series of other factors. Departments have been facing new regulations and compliance issues that are mainly unfunded mandates. For example, the police department has faced post-reform. Our public works departments face not only Mass DEP compliance issues, but also OSHA regulations that result in increased costs. We all know that we've been faced with PFAS regulations that are impacting our ability to fund our services. What we've also found is that there are new programs that come out, and sometimes those new programs are good. But, for example, ARPA or even opioid settlement monies. But when those new programs arise, there is a cost associated with that in order to absorb those into your organizational structure. They are outside the scope of anything that we've done before, outside the scope of anybody's job description. And so while there are benefits to these programs, there are also internal costs associated to make sure that the departments can support and implement those programs. So we need to be mindful of that. We've also found some, what we will call alarming budgetary deficiencies in several departments. For example, our facilities department, I think you've heard me say this time and time again, has been chronically underfunded. It is clear when we look at the facilities department, the funding level that we have appropriated for that department is negligible compared to the minimum required amounts that they have to spend on our maintenance contracts year over year. So we have a significant deficiency in the facilities department. Same thing is happening in the sewer department and others. What we've also found is inadequate staffing levels in some departments. There are areas where we need to increase staffing. I think you'll agree that coastal resiliency is one that this board has been asking for time and time again, but there are others in other departments. We've also had to absorb extraordinary vendor price increases within the funding resources that we've allocated to our departments. And what we also found is that there's oftentimes end-of-year budgetary stress that results in things like delayed or deferred maintenance. And so what I mean by that is, as we start to stare down the end of the fiscal year, there may have been departments who have incurred unforeseen circumstances that they've had to use their appropriations, and when they are faced with having to pay for maintenance or property repairs, those often get deferred or delayed until the next fiscal year, if they get done at all, based on end-of-year budgetary pressures. So while we weren't...
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I just may inquire. You mentioned earlier in connection with the school department, economies of scale, and of course that helps everyone in terms of being able to do more with less. And setting aside school issues for the moment, with the theme of economies of scale, as I look at this slide, and you had mentioned costs for facilities, I think it was, and certainly vendor price increases. A lot of that is inflationary, I understand. But where I'm going with this is, are we maximizing the opportunities that we have through combis, for example, or county group pricing for all sorts of stuff? I know that we're participating in many of those programs, and they're not as easy as they may necessarily seem. But I just want some sort of sense as to how available those programs are and how much we're participating in them.
We are absolutely utilizing those programs for procurement. Our department heads seek out competitive price commitments when purchasing various items. There are lots of purchasing consortiums that the town uses, and I think there's even more that the school department, I'm looking at Lisa over here in particular, there are a wide variety of purchasing consortiums that we do take advantage of in order to get the best price possible and to meet procurement compliance.
So when we talk about the vendor price increases, that's above and beyond what we're able to save through the price consortiums and the group buying and that sort of thing.
Absolutely, because you've got to remember that, those prices are not fixed, locked prices that are immune to inflationary pressures.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Next. So tonight, what we are here to do is the Sustainable Budget Task Force has worked with the town manager. We have reviewed our findings and our recommendations to date, and the town manager has presented to you in your packet a budget directive. We are asking you, the select board, this evening to endorse that budget, the town manager's budget directive that would ask departments to prepare 2 different budget scenarios for FY26. The first budget scenario would be a level funded plus 2.5% budget. So what that means is that the departments would use their FY25 budgetary level plus a 2.5%, reflecting a Prop 2.5 increase. This level funded, so it's not level services, this level funded option will result in reductions across our organization. However, it was incumbent upon us to make sure that the department heads participated in that process so that we could get their feedback on what that impact would look like. So we know that there are consequences to a level-funded budget, and we need to know what those consequences are. The second option would be,
Wait, before you go to the second option, could I ask a question about the plus 2.5%? Could you explain why the 2.5% increase?
yep, I can. Do you mind if I hold that question in abeyance for a second? I'm going to talk about the second one, and then it might become clear. Okay, great. All right. So what we're asking the departments, or what we would like to ask the departments to do, is prepare a second option, which would be the department requested budget. That's a very common term that is used across municipalities to indicate for a department to prepare a budget that reflects their actual needs, their actual resources that they need to operate their department and to provide the services that they are required or obligated to provide. We know that for years, we have been asking departments to find efficiencies, to consolidate, to cut, have reductions. And what we found is that carving has been happening for several years. There are many departments that their budgets are very lean and that there isn't an opportunity to continue to carve, and that in order for them to even provide the basic required services that they need to provide, that they need to include increases in their budget. So I want to make sure that this board is not surprised when we do get the department requested budget back reflecting the actual cost, that there may in fact be either staffing increases or operational expense increases in that request. So the idea would be that the departments would prepare these two scenarios. They would typically start with the department requested budget, which would be what does it take for me to ensure that we continue to provide high quality services to this community, and what is the actual cost of doing that. And then from that budget, prepare the first scenario, which is the level funded plus 2.5%, because what that would represent is the consequences or the reductions that would need to be made to get to option one. The reason that we chose level funded plus 2.5% is level funded would be far more drastic than allowing the provision for a 2.5% increase. The 2.5% would represent the allowable increase under the state law to increase the tax levy without any other means necessary. And it would give the departments the ability to have some level of growth instead of a level funded budget over FY25. Does that answer your question, Amy?
It does. I'm not sure I don't have concerns, and maybe it's not realistic to think that any one department may not need a 2.5 or any increase. Maybe some departments are seeing less needs in their department. So I just feel, I know we've done this before in the past, but it's always concerned me to have a blanket, plus 2.5 or plus whatever that other number is. I think that only increases should be asked for if it's demonstrated that they're needed and necessary.
Okay. I hear you. I can tell you that through the course of my work, as well as the work of the task force, because keep in mind that the task force did meet with a large number of our department heads. But I also work with those departments on a regular basis, on a go-forward basis. And we are not seeing those reductions that you're talking about in terms of reducing their budgetary needs. The services that those departments are providing, nobody has told them to scale those services back. As we've seen with population increases as well as student enrollment, student enrollment has sort of stabled off. The number of people that we're providing services to has not declined. In a number of departments, we've seen that the service demands have increased dramatically. So we're not seeing those efficiencies, and I can say with surety to you that there have been no significant areas across any department to find those cost reductions that you're looking for. And we also have to remember that we are in a collective bargaining environment here. And so we have employees, the majority of whom are covered by collective bargaining agreements that we need to abide by. And we are also in the middle of undertaking the classification and compensation study. Those results are currently in progress right now and will be made available by the end of September to be incorporated into part of this process. So we'll see those results as part of the task force work.
I follow up. So,
Of course.
so is the idea here then that the 2.5% increase on top of the level funding would cover the collective bargaining increases per contract as well as the compensation study? And the reason I ask is because I just question whether the level funded numbers aren't more clear without an additional 2.5. So you can really see what, if the town doesn't agree to some type of an override, if that's where we're headed, what the town might need to give up. So I'm just trying to understand if that wouldn't make it more clear to not have the 2.5 built in.
So the premise behind it is that we know, based on the conversations that we've just had here tonight, that inflation is continuing to go up, that the costs of providing services go up. The impacts that we have on our departments do not go away. They do not subside. And the ability for us to automatically, under the law, under Proposition 2.5, to increase our tax levy by 2.5% provides somewhat of a buffer for the departments to absorb some of the impacts that we've just spent about an hour chatting about.
As long as I understand that it covers those, the collective bargaining money as well as the compensation study. Because I'm not sure that.
Can I just make maybe there's a, let me sure I understand, Amy, is that by leaving it level funded, i.e. basically just 2025 money into 2026, and not adding 2.5, you really make it very clear as to what the impact that would have on the services that the town. So it provides additional clarity, right?
That's what I was thinking. That's what I'm questioning, wouldn't it?
So one of the things that we looked at, and I will say from the get-go, this was a great committee. The schools were wonderful partners. Nobody was looking at this as a vehicle to feather their nest. Everybody was, I mean, I was so impressed by the fact that everybody that was sitting around that table was looking at it as a whole, as a community. And the conversations were, you know, sometimes eye-opening, but always fair and always to the best interest of the community. There is not just a contractual obligation that we are facing, and to ignore it would be wasting the time of these department heads, would be asking them if they said level funding, we're not even looking at something that would be baseline. So, because these contracts are in place. So, and we have never, since 2.5, not included the 2.5 increase. So it really is a baseline. The other piece of it is that as we went through 16 meetings, it became really obvious that that was not adequate. That it wasn't just people. It was, I don't know about you, but I just got my electric bill. So did the town. You know, you get your gas bill, you get cable, you get internet, you get anything that you can possibly think of. And all I kept thinking of is, you know, those wonderful expressions that we all heard from our parents, penny wise, pound foolish. We have been, for the last few years, and we got a reprieve with COVID because we didn't have a lot of people that were here. We didn't have programs, so we had money to get through and meet our obligations that is no longer in play. But we have gone from cutting fat to cutting bone. And we have to just let the community understand what those obligations are, how we are not meeting them, and the facilities, where the labor wasn't the one that was the most egregious, it was facilities. The fact that we have we do not have the wherewithal to change filters, and in certain instances, this wasn't data that was being given to us piecemeal. This was data that Mary was unbelievable, and Rainey was fabulous, and the department heads that we invited in. We had hard data in front of us and what they've done, and it wasn't pretty. So the baseline of level funded plus 2.5, I beg you to allow that, because anything else is, it's not even close to realistic. It is at least something that we can say, well, level funded plus are allowable increases, because we don't get as much money from the beach now. We might have the ability on excise tax and if certain things pass, but we have no guarantees. So we're just trying to do a realistic look at this, and then also ask our department heads, what is it that you actually need to run your departments appropriately, to service the equipment that you've got, to maintain the buildings that we have been generously given by the community, to staff appropriately so that you're not running into overtime and cutting things that you should be spending money on because you've got to make a payday. So I'm really begging you to just let us continue, because Finance Committee then will take this data, which is what we promised all the way through. Rainey promised it, I promised it at last year's town meeting, that anything that we do going forward would be based on hard data. And this is where we continue to get the data. Mary's given us the data that we need. Lisa has given us the data that we need from the schools. And they, with open books, there's nobody here that's not telling us everything that we needed to know. And we need to continue down this path so that we can stand up in front of the community and say, this is the facts. This is what it costs to have 97% residential. I mean, that's it. I love this town. You guys know that. I love the way it is. I love the community. I love the atmosphere. I love how we live. And I have come to realize, to a more significant place, that there's a price tag. We don't have commercial tax base to offset. We've only got us. And if we want to continue being us, we got to pay for it. And we have to now find out what that's going to cost. So I'll shut up.
Mr. Chairman, if I just pick up on Amy's point, I think I understand where you're coming from in terms of illustrating for the residents what level funding would be. But and maybe this is a question for Mary, wouldn't we be able to do that just by showing what the fiscal year 25 number was? And then say, okay, that would have been the number for level funding. And then to Betsy's point, we don't necessarily hold them to that number. We go with the level funder plus 2.5, and I guess that would be, I don't want to say splitting the baby, but I think that would allow us to have a more realistic picture of what the service constraints would be, because I think most of our budget is services, right? It's people. It's not stuff. So
I beg to differ, but okay.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
When we get down to the data and you see how we have significant shortfalls in maintaining the stuff that we can predict what it's going to cost us for our labor, because we have contracts. We understand what the marketplace is. But we have been shorting certain areas. we have been making people work overtime that they didn't necessarily want to work, and causing, during COVID especially, and after COVID, having people just head out the door because they didn't want to do it anymore. And there's a price tag on that. So if we at least, and it's another layer of, the only way that those numbers become significant is if you start telling people the outcome of that. Well, Mary showed you what the increases are year over year over year. So it's a number that it's not valid. It's a cut budget. It's not a level funded budget. It's a cut budget, because it's not going to cost the same to turn on the lights, heat the place, buy the gas, pay for the people in '26 as it did in '25.
No, I get that. I get that. And what I'm trying to pick up on in Amy's point is to demonstrate maybe the extent to which the increase is really
I think
gonna
it'll
hit
be
us.
dramatic enough with 2.5.
Well, yeah,
But whatever, but
But
sure.
I think Amy has a good point in terms of just saying, hey, this is what it cost last year. And I think we do this every year anyway. This is what it cost last year. This is what it's going to cost next year. Here's the difference. We did the best we could in terms of maintaining that number, and then we vote on it. So I'm not arguing with you. I'm just trying to make sure that we get the information that the voters are going to need at town meeting, because that's where we ultimately are
Rubber
ending
hits
up
the
on
road.
this. But I want to make sure that, to your point and Mary's point, that if we're saying budget option 1, and we'll get to 2 in a second,
Sure.
rather than have the department heads try to work with this year's number without the 2.5%, I agree that's probably not a good use of their time. But I do think, to Amy's point, that having that information for the town, for the voters, is useful. But do you see the distinction I'm making there?
can I just
I'm not asking them to work with that number, but that we just know what that number was.
And that's what I want to clarify. It's very easy for us to tell you right now what that number is. We know what the FY25 budget is, and we know we can match that up or compare that to each of these options. However, the exercise for the department heads to go through, we are asking and recommending that we include the 2.5% increase. As Betsy alluded to, it's the impact that it's going to have on the departments. And we know that we have the capability of increasing up to Prop 2.5. If we have the departments go through not only the work of preparing the level funded budget, but also the implication or the ramifications of that throughout our organization is going to be much more dramatic. When department heads go through this process, they're going to come up with 2 options, and we're going to have to publicly talk about those. That is going to make some members of our workforce nervous, scared, uncertain about what's happening with the organization. And we want to make sure that we take that into consideration when we ask department heads to put together a version of a budget that is realistic for us to start working with as a baseline.
Right.
Fernando, go ahead.
Yeah. Not every department is going to, well, some admin groups, right, that may not use all the 2.5%, may not, depending on, anyway, there's a look, Mary's saying they will use it all up 2.5 anyway, right? I'm just building on the conversation here, is the whole objective of this exercise is for people to fully understand, right, and have the data to be able to make an informed choice, right? Because the actual needs, based on our conversation, are going to be significant, all right? And so therefore, to be able to articulate in a way that people understand is we need to do this exercise. So I think what Amy is actually talking about, and building on Brian there, is if we just go level funded, it'll make that more transparent, more impactful, maybe tells a better story than I think there's maybe people will think, well, you know, they threw in 2.5 because they've got 2.5, and so they pumped it up to 2.5. I just want to make sure that misconception is not there, right? That people can have
The one size fits all.
right. That's all.
Jack Kent, Tremont Street. I think to go to what you're requesting is a waste of a lot of people's time. I think when they go to their level funded plus 2.5%, there's still going to be 1.4%, roughly speaking, that they're going to have to cut out of their operation that they had last year, because 2.5% doesn't maintain a level dollar. So you're just, it doesn't make sense to spend that time, in my opinion. Thank you.
There's a, I hear you guys, right? I hear you, I understand. But there's, my learned colleague here is shaking her head, right? And there'll be a lot of other people in the town shaking their head. So this is really important that we get this right, that we're able to articulate, come the annual town meeting, the choices that are facing us as a town. And so therefore, if we can get less head shaking and less of that going on, and really looking at it and believing and embracing the data and not questioning it, the better off we are.
We're not on cameras, and I'm not shaking my head in disbelief. I'm really, I don't think I shook my head at all.
All right, sorry.
I do like clarity and simplicity when and again, it's the one size fits all, 2.5% across the board,
It's not going to be built a budget plus 2.5%, and then they add things to their budget to equal that. That's their allowable, that would be their allowable baseline.
You need to be closer.
Yeah,
Still got that sound, sir.
I know. Keeps
I
on
love
coming
hitting this stuff. This is how I fix everything.
So,
So,
and we have to
don't
answer the
need,
question.
and honestly, I'm being a bit of a brat, because I don't want to do 3 budgets.
Yeah, and
And I know that the department heads cannot do 3 budgets, and that's what you're asking.
there
Because we've been
is,
gone up 2.5% for as long as I can remember.
there is a desire on this board for the last couple of years to hold the line as best we could.
Sure.
But there is also what we see just about every week in this position of increasing demand and expenditures that we're transferring money at the end of the year because we're going over budget. For that example alone, that's a cut with that plus 2.5 for those departments. And we also don't have a planning department. I mean, we have one person working there. I at least get complaints from a number of individuals about services. And it's no fault of the people in those positions. They are lean. We are to the bone as a town. And I just, you know, I understand this, and I think we owe it to the public to toe that line and to ask the tough questions and to understand what services and cuts might have to happen. But to everyone's point out in the audience, I think it makes perfect sense to do this 2.5 increase as we've always done, and to understand what cuts and reductions, and if possible, to give us more detail about it, so people understand why it is requiring that they have that 2.5 increase. I like information too, and I think it's important, and I think it's great that the schools are involved in this conversation too. We kind of have understood our budget here, but I think it's, the more information the better, but I don't want to have to do 3 budgets. I also don't want to send people out onto the street looking for new jobs either. And because that costs money. We have a lot of open positions we have to fill. So, that's all.
I was on the Sustainable Budget Task Force. I fully support the 2.5. I'm trying to make sure that, to answer Amy's question, is we got to be careful when we do present the budget plus 2.5. We're able to justify where that, if we did use the 2.5 or we use 2.25, we've got to be able to articulate that and demonstrate that we were just not taking the 2.5 and grabbing it, right, is justified with that 2.5 rate.
a personal
There
commitment
we go.
that the finance committee is not going to just take whatever the budget was last year, time with an extra 2.5% and accept it as a baseline.
Right.
Each and every one of these budgets will be vetted within an inch of their lives.
Oh, I have no doubt.
As they have been, and JR can.
Oh, I know they have, you know, I sit in on most of those
Afraid
meetings.
that
Yeah.
somebody's just going to say, okay, I need another 2.5% and not have the.
Supporting.
Not have the data to back up that request, plus
Yeah.
what they're going to be cutting from what they've got. It's a legit number, it really is, and I just cannot, making people do this and then do that exercise, do another exercise, and do the requested on top of it. We have a very small amount of time. I am hopeful beyond belief that you all can verify and you can direct Rainey and Mary to send out this request to the department heads so that they can start working on it. Because we're meeting September 10th, yep. And we're getting our, the finance committee's going to get their marching orders the same way, as the department heads as to what we're going to be doing and how we're going to be looking at it and what we need to step up our efforts in order to encompass 2 budgets and to do the verification that we owe the community with any requests that we make for 1%, 2.5%, or whatever. I will promise you that that is going to be what happens.
I have no doubt that the finance committee, I sit in on many meetings.
Yes, you do, and it's great.
And I know the extent of the deep dives that you guys do, and it's appreciated. And I know that there's a lot of money that's being saved, and I appreciate that. What I'm trying to do, where I think the town is going to really be faced with some tough challenges,
Sure.
is to try to make this as easy to compare, to look at. I've never been one to believe that it's a one-size-fits-all, these blanket, increases to budgets that go out to department heads has typically been not something I agree with, because I don't believe that where every department is the same. I do believe that some departments
Sure.
at different times need more of an increase than at other times, or other departments.
And that will absolutely be taken into account on
And then,
this.
and lastly, what I believe I heard you say, and I'm going to remember this, is that if this board agrees to the 2.5%, which sounds like we're headed, that is going to be covering a part of the reason that you're asking, we're doing it this way, is because it covers the collective bargaining agreements and increases. So
No,
that's
that is not what we're
because that is
saying.
what was said a little while ago.
No,
So that's
no,
why I'm confirming
I think
this.
you've misunderstood. What we said
haven't.
was, it gives us a legally permissible baseline.
Okay, so I
And
just
we'll,
want,
and then
let's
that
clarify
compared
that then.
to, and well, how does that play with these departments? Here is your legally permissible baseline, which is the level funded plus 2.5 increase that is legally permissible with Prop 2.5. What does that look like? How does that play in our FY '26 budget? What does that look like? That is what you're getting, because there are a number of our contracts that haven't been settled that will take place in FY '26. We have the
all our
schools,
contracts
we
have
have,
been settled
we have
last
the
year.
police. There are a number of contracts that are not settled, so we,
All of our contracts are settled, aren't they, Rainey?
they expire at the end of '25.
They're all coming due.
I thought we did collective bargaining last year, and
3 years.
They're all coming due.
No. So no, but it will give us at least the legally permissible levy. And what does that look like? Because that is what, by law, we can ask the folks for without any additional conversation. And that's where we came to it.
But will still result in cuts and reductions.
I believe so, but give me a chance to do the work. And the finance committee and Mary and the department heads give us the chance to do the work so that we can answer that question with 100% certainty. This is what this is what you've said is our baseline, and this is what this will look like in translation.
Mr. Chairman, if I...
Go right ahead.
Not to
Thank you.
belabor any point, and I think we're going to get to budget option 2, all right? And my question is, if we go forward with, and I do think we need to do budget option 1, but realistically, how far does that get us in terms of a sustainable budget going forward, as opposed to kicking the can again till 27, and then we're back to budget option 1 and budget option 2 again?
I'm not understanding the question, Brian. Do you understand?
Yes. So what you're asking, Brian, is we are asking the department heads to prepare an FY26 budget that reflects actual costs. Is that only going to get us through 1 year of this exercise, or will it be able to allow us to prepare a 5-year forecast with reasonable certainty, so that we know that the revenues will be there to support it? So you're looking for a longer-term solution to make sure that when the departments put their budgets together, that we have an eye toward the next several years out to make sure that we can develop.
No, I think, can I try another way?
Sure.
All right. What Brian's asking, will level funded plus 2.5 deliver the services that this town requires? Will it?
Oh, that's
will it-
not what I heard at all. He asked
No,
about
that's
option
no,
2.
All right, all
No,
right.
that's not, I mean, I got to be a little more clear.
Yep.
So we're asking I want to be sensitive to the exercise. So there's 2 things going on. One is we're asking the department heads to put together potentially 2 different budgets. The other is we're trying to create a sustainable budget overall going forward.
This was a lot of fun,
right?
but I don't want to do
So-
it over here.
Right. So, and to Betsy's point, my concern, or I guess my question, is if I'm reading the tea leaves, even if we go with budget option 1, right, that gets us through 26 fiscal, right, theoretically,
Okay.
however we work out the budget, right, we could potentially have the same issue again the following year.
Absolutely.
Right,
If
so-
you're using option 1
Right.
as your baseline, this problem will be perpetual.
Right.
And
Okay,
and
that's
there will
where
be
I'm going. That's my
further
point.
erosion
Yes.
year over year.
Okay.
Because
We
what
do
will
both
happen,
options?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what we would do, both options, but none of us want to spend money, right? But I want to.
But you all enjoy the services,
I want to
right?
prevent, to the extent possible, the can kicking, so that we can, if we have to take a hit, so to speak, at some point, whether, and this would be the voter's decision, whether we do it sooner rather than later, what are the pros and cons of the various approaches?
Right, so we're developing a we could argue that budget option 2 is going to be a sustainable 5-year forecast, right? 5-year budget.
it will be the basis for which we use to develop a sustainable forecast. So the
Right.
department heads will be given instructions to prepare their FY26 budget,
Yeah.
but to also have at top of mind future issues, future growth, future services. You know, we've heard from a couple of departments that they know some regulations are in the works and will be coming in 1 to 2 years. We are going to ask them to ensure that they incorporate that into their budget process and make us aware of it so that we can prepare that 5-year sustainable forecast from what we receive from the departments.
Okay, so stated another way, budget option 1 is just fiscal 26, really. Budget option 2 is a sustainable budget.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
And I, just from watching the finance committee, I think any exercise like this, you get a sense of the services and needs that the community wants too, because all these departments know what the needs are and what the demands are on those departments. And it's then becomes incumbent on us to whether, we can afford that. And I think that's that's what's good about this exercise. I don't think now's the time to talk about cutting and reductions. This is about preparing an exercise, and I think it's important so that we can get as much information as possible.
Correct. This is to set the directive because we need to hear from the department heads
Right.
what choices they deem in a priority order in order to fund the services that they need to provide.
Yeah.
It's not up to us to make that decision without their input.
Yeah.
Okay. So tonight, we're looking for the directive, and if we look at the last slide, this would be the recommended timeline for handling the FY26 budget. So assuming that we can get some agreement on an endorsement this evening, the departments will be then instructed to begin on September 1st to prepare those budgets and have that information completed within a 1-month time period, so by the beginning of October, which would then give us an opportunity to come back before this select board and give you very, very high-level results without having done any analysis, without having done any critical thinking about it, but just to give you a high-level update on what we see from those departments in those two options. And then we begin the work of that budgetary review through the Finance Committee, through Fiscal Advisory, and through our meetings with the Finance Director and Town Manager in order to prepare a balanced budget that will then be presented in accordance with our bylaws and schedule for town meeting. Okay?
Just how would you gather that high-level information? Would it be through public meetings, or are you just meeting independently with department heads and getting their
So-
feedback?
The department heads will be instructed to prepare their budget using the ClearGov tool. And then we will collect that data and analyze the data from the departments. I will have had some preliminary meetings or conversations with many of the department heads along the way in order to impart some information into that high-level review.
I only ask because I think, to Amy's point, and just with something there are certain departments there's going to be more significant or emotional impacts in the community. And I would like those to be as public and transparent as possible. I certainly want to know when the schools are going to be before the Finance Committee and things like that, so that everybody knows what's at stake. Because those are bigger pieces of the pie. And some departments may come to you and say, we don't need it, we just need a 1% increase.
And that's the type of information that, although it will not have been distilled to the level of critical analysis through the Finance Committee, that is why I wanted to incorporate another update in front of the Select Board early enough in the process so that there are no surprises, to set the expectations that this is option 1 is our worst case scenario of how we can get through FY26, and then option 2 would be this is what the departments actually need, and this will help to build the baseline going forward and give you a high-level overview.
Give us a C, too? Maybe a D?
No more options. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, you made a good observation earlier about planning department. We're asking a lot of that
One
department.
person,
There's Emily is phenomenal in keeping the trains running, but we have been looking for a director. Not only are we going to need a director, but we've been asking more and more of that department. So as we look at, for example, option 2, and I don't want to micromanage or get into the weeds during this discussion, but I'd be curious to know, for planning specifically, or maybe, I don't know if there are other departments that are similarly situated, but how do we put together a sustainable budget for that situation or situations like it?
Yep. That's part of gaps that we've seen.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could, the memo that we received and what we're going to be voting on this evening, the Select Board is being asked to endorse specific actions and concepts. And number 4 on this list asks us to endorse the town to work with applicable town boards and committees to identify the town's position on potential zoning changes to facilitate the thoughtful evaluation of business districts expansions and increases to housing production. Seems like we spent a long time talking about the goals of the town, and what is the reason that we find ourselves in this situation is that we've deliberately over the years not been in favor of commercial zoning, for instance, and we know that the town is under significant pressures with the MBTA zoning, as well as the accessory dwelling unit laws that will be in need of following. These pressures on housing, I don't understand, this particular directive here.
We're not asking you to consider that tonight. That's just for future discussion.
Future
Okay,
discussion.
because I have
The
a
only
lot
stuff-
to say about that, so we can
Yep,
table that
and
conversation.
and knowing that, the only things we needed you to react to were item number 1 in the motion at the bottom of the memo. Yeah, because that is not a 20-minute conversation on number 4.
That is not,
That's more like a
okay.
20-day conversation.
Yeah, and
That's
number
a-
3 would probably have to be posted as well.
Oh, yeah. That's why 2, 3, and 4 aren't part of the motion. It's only for number 1 and
Okay,
1
it
and
always
2 in the
troubles me when
motion.
we have these things that kind of signify that we're,
No, and this is not
Okay,
that. That's
but
why it was
I
I
separate
don't
and
wanna-
distinct.
I
Amy,
don't want to
Amy,
endorse
some-
something I don't mean
No,
to.
no, but Amy, the whole point of this exercise is stated at the beginning, right? We've made choices as a town. Wouldn't you like to know the cost of that choice?
I think the townspeople need to know the cost of their choices.
Exactly, so
and
that's part of what I think in the future we need to look at. If we want to, there are possible zoning changes. We could change there's a certain level of service that's required to meet the needs of the town, right? To meet the needs of the residents. We're 97% property tax, right? So what happens if we go ahead and look at zoning changes to increase the business districts, and we go from a 97% to 90%? What will that contribute? All right, so that I think this is all about giving clarity to the decisions that we make as a town, so that you're making an informed choice. Right? This is not saying change the character, but just understand the impact of that decision. That's all I'm saying.
I believe
yeah?
that what we're doing tonight is doing that
Part of that.
analysis. I'm
Yeah.
not sure that the language of this other portion was, and
That's
I'm not sure that that is an easy exercise
No.
to calculate the,
It's not.
an additional amount of business in town and how much value that would have. And I mean,
yeah.
that's a much bigger exercise. and-
correct. But at
and
some point,
Not something I think,
no, it's not for tonight. But
Right.
at some point, I think it's worthwhile understanding those ramifications, but not tonight, and not for the foreseeable future. But I think it's an idea that we need to look at.
Ready for motion?
Yeah, yes, but we have folks from the school here. We also have Alex Chen. Does anybody else wish to be heard preliminarily here? All right. Then I will take a motion.
Before I read this motion, there is one word that I have
Some difficulty with, not in the word itself, not in pronouncing it, but in the use of it. And number 2, when we say needs the department to properly maintain our infrastructure, I think that implies that we are not properly maintaining our infrastructure, so I'd like to change the word properly to sustainably in number 2.
Actually,
I think we said what we meant.
yeah, we said what we meant.
What we meant.
Because it isn't properly.
It is not.
The word we chose.
Yes.
This is not.
So are we saying our infrastructure is not presently being properly maintained?
Portions of it, yes.
In some
Portions of it,
instances,
that's correct.
yes.
In some instances, I am saying exactly
Yep,
that.
portions of it. That is true.
Just so you know, Betsy, your words aren't getting picked up on the mic.
You're so quiet.
The commentary was,
But I
in
think
some
we got the
instances,
gist.
we would absolutely state that the facilities are not being properly maintained.
Correct.
Yes.
I would like to know more about that, not this evening.
You-
but I would
you
like-
will.
I would
You
like to
will.
know exactly what's not being properly maintained.
Correct, you will.
I move that the board vote to request that the town manager include in his fiscal year 26 budget message the following. A request that each department head prepare 2 budget scenarios for fiscal year 26, specifically, 1, level funded budget, a proposed budget representing fiscal year 25 base funding plus a 2.5% increase. Number 2, department requested budget, a proposed budget reflecting the needs of the department to properly maintain our infrastructure and service levels.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, and thanks for all the time that this
Yeah.
is taking. I know it's a huge undertaking, and thank you, guys.
It's a lot of work, 16 meetings, appreciate it.
16 and counting.
And counting.
And yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night, guys.
Good night, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
What, I mean, we haven't had this problem with pac-TV before. What's going
Speaker's
on?
dying, he's going to replace it on Tuesday.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
What I should have done is said, I don't hear any noise. What noise do you hear?
It's just the hum in my head.
That would have been more fun.
All right. Since we're alone now, we can do the town manager's report.
You got it. Here we
We've
go.
emptied the audience.
Yep. Just like every other week. Seawall update. As I had told you last week, this week we're going to have the seawall bid opening. That's going to be on Thursday. When we have the results, I'll let you know. I know you're all going to be waiting to know, as I am as well.
Yeah.
There's been no, with regard to Duxbury Beach itself, there's been no change since last week in any restrictions or access on the beach. The least turn chick that is preventing the OSV vehicle access north of Crossover 1 is within its fledged window. So DBR expects that before the end of the week, it will be fledged and the OSV restrictions north of Crossover 1 will be able to be lifted. Once that happens, beach ops will be notified as soon as anything develops on that front. Amy, last meeting you asked for a quick comparison on where we were last year versus this year. This year we had 50 pair of piping plovers. Last year we had 46. This year, 23 nests were lost. Wait a minute, back up, stop. There were 15 broods this year with a total of 43 chicks fledged. Also, this year, 23 nests were lost. 18 of those due to predators.
This is all 24.
Yes.
This is all this year, yeah.
25 broods were lost, 12 of which they suspected was a result of predation.
How does it
I
compare
thought
with
you just
last year?
said 18 were lost.
No, no, it was,
Okay.
23 nests were lost, 18 due to predators,
Okay.
but 25 broods, so it's different.
What's the difference between a brood and a nest?
Eggs versus little babies,
Oh.
little baby chicks. Yeah. So in 23,
Yes.
we had 46 total pair. There were 25 broods that fledged that season, and they lost 20 nests and 14 broods.
So we've lost a lot more this year than
Yes.
last year.
Yes.
But it was interesting, though, didn't we open a lot earlier this year than we
We
have
did.
in the
A
past?
month.
A
We
month,
did.
that's big, that's
Yeah.
big. So
Yeah.
what was the difference by opening a month earlier? How did we manage that?
Pallets, right?
Well,
I think it was pallets and predation.
the deterrence program worked, and Mother Nature.
More predation this year.
Yeah. In the past, and I forgive me because I don't know, it wasn't on that on the one update I looked at, but because I looked at the last update because I knew it was
Yeah.
the one that had the whole total from last year. It didn't say how many were lost because of storms, but in previous years, like I think 22 or 21, we lost some because of storms. You get a high tide, you get a bad storm, it comes up, they nest too low, they wipe them out, and that goes away. But But there's your comparison between this year and last year.
Interesting, so predation is, they have a predation program, but it's still
Oh, yeah.
not preventing predation.
Right.
Different predators.
Different predators.
yeah,
I hear it's
efficacy.
weasels and minks this year.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think we
but-
have weasels.
We do have weasels.
We do have
We do?
weasels, yeah.
Are you sure they're called, aren't they woodchucks? Or-
No,
No, they're
weasels.
different. Weasels are part of the mink family.
Yeah,
They're all rodents, but
yeah.
woodchucks, is a groundhog. So
Yeah.
When you get rid of the coyotes,
I'm
the
not gonna
weasels.
make any
Well,
weasel
I
jokes.
I think there's, that's what happens when you interfere with Mother Nature.
Exactly.
I
and
wonder
then
if coyotes eat
I
weasels.
also wanted to give you each a copy of the future agenda items so you can see what's out on the horizon. I had promised that at the last meeting as well. That's my update. But if you want to stare at that for a minute, and let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer those as well.
I'll give you guys
I have a question.
7 seconds to read
about
this.
The study that is being done on PFAS sources.
They're coming in.
And the last we
Yeah.
had talked to, what is it, Weston and Sampson, or the other, what's the other, something partners?
Environmental.
Environmental
Environmental,
Partners. We had talked about some additional sources, and I had raised the concern about the old Clipper building, and I learned that that had been a place where they did paint stripping.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
Right.
wondered, did they look into that, or where are we with that study?
Hold on, I'm making a note. I believe, hold on. Old Clipper building. Hold on, I'm just making a note. I believe that they will be coming in to your meeting, is it the 9th of
It
September?
says right on here, it's number 10, all dates TBD.
Yeah, to be determined, but I think have you got a meeting? It's either the 9th or the 16th, it's one of those two. 'Cause
Will you let them know I'm going to be asking
I just
about
wrote a
that?
note.
Perfect.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. It's one of those two, and forgive me, I can't remember which, because one of the staff members was out on vacation, and the other was coming back, so I wanted to make sure they were both here, because I talked to Mark and Sheila about that, and we wanted Alston to be here, the guy that's doing the work, so. But yes, I made a note, Amy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just two things. So as I look at this, rating 11A, the Lions Club signage.
Yeah.
You can take that off, right? It's up. It's up.
Is it? Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Looks great.
Good to know.
And then 12, are we going to include here the, that litigation out on the beach? The stamper thing? I don't see that in 12.
Yes. The reason you don't see that here is because I think I already have it on an agenda item. These are the things that need to be pushed up, but I think we've already got that.
Okay.
I'll make a note of
Has there
that.
been something filed? I might have missed a meeting.
I'll make a note of that. I think it's on one of those meetings I just mentioned, Brian. It's either the 9th or the 16th.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Sharon will be coming in for that.
All right.
And as you know, if you have any additions, comments, deletions, whatever else, you just let me know. We'll get it on there. This thing has changed about 4 times. We do move them. There's just always 15
Well,
out
it's
there.
always good to get something off of there.
Yeah, and it's funny, few come off, few come on, few come off, few come on, so. We're hitting them. That's my report.
All right.
Oh,
Thank you.
I don't see it on here, but we did talk about revisiting the sand removal
Yes,
bylaw. Is that on here?
it's not on here, it's on the other agendas, because I've been working with Pat
Okay.
on that. And
I don't want to
Weston
forget
and
to do
Sampson.
that.
Oh, don't worry, I have not
Again,
forgotten.
I think that there was unintended consequences.
Nope, that one's coming back too. That's on another thing.
All right. We have committee appointments and reappointments, and I believe that's it.
I move to appoint Graham Nelson to the Historical Commission for a term ending June 30, 2027.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We have a resignation from the Open Space, Open Space Committee.
Yep.
Richard Holmes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Holmes, for your service on the Open Space Committee. I will take the event permits now. We have a beach mass.
Is there anybody here to
No,
present?
I asked before.
Okay. I move that Mr. Matthew Bresman, as the Director of Family Faith Formation at Holy Family Catholic Church, is granted permission to hold a beach mass and cookout event on Sunday, September 15th, 2024, from 3 o'clock p.m. to 6:30 p.m., located at Duxbury Beach, Resident Lot Bayside, contingent upon the conditions of the permit.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have minutes.
I understand Fernando needs to abstain from this one. It's April 1st,
Okay.
2024. I move to approve the April 1st, 2024 Select Board open session minutes as presented. And I see that they're presented tonight, but they were amended last time, which is why they're re-presented tonight.
Okay.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Absent.
Announcements.
We have 4 announcements. Monday, September 2nd, Town Hall offices will be closed for Labor Day. Number 2, State Primary Voting Day, Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024, from 7 o'clock a.m. until 8 o'clock p.m. at the Lieutenant Timothy J. Steele Athletic Building located at 130 St. George Street in Duxbury. Early ballots for the state primary must be received by the town clerk's office by 8 o'clock p.m. on Election Day. Number 3, Beach Party, Saturday, August 31st at 4 p.m. Visit DuxburyCelebrates.com for more information. Fourth and finally, the next scheduled Select Board meeting will be on Monday, September 9th, 2024 at 6:30 p.m.
And I know, just to mention, the beach party group, anybody's interested in helping build the bonfire, or there's lots of work to be done with that, and it's always a great time. So if anybody has a desire to help out, give one of the committee members a call.
And how would they do that, Amy?
I
Just
think they can get
through the website?
our numbers listed, or through the website, or Sue Sue Kelly's always happy to shoot somebody an email or whatever, letting them know, or shoot us an email,
Okay,
or through the website. There's got to be contact information.
cool.
I will add that school starts on Wednesday. I wish the best to all our teachers and staff and our students. Ask everybody to slow down with those buses going by. They're working hard to get those routes together, and I hope everybody has a great school year.
Summer is so short, isn't it? It's like we were just.
Are you feeling the joy at the McGee house the way we are at the Reed house?
I'm spinning. Matching up calendars at this point.
I know, it's fun.
Yep. We have a bonus shellfish season for
We do.
September 2024.
I move that the Select Board declare a temporary bonus shellfish season for 1, the commercial harvesting of soft-shell clams for the month of September. 2, the commercial harvesting of quahog clams for the month of September.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Gavel to gavel.